All right, quick tip, fastest way to determine if you have a Crankhub bolt capture, CBC as they call it, for your S55 motor. So, you know, one of the quickest way to determine that is if you actually look at it. Now, by way of example, the crank hub and where the crank bolt capture is in the same place at the front of the engine for the S55. In front of it though, you have the brace, of course, you have the air intake hose and so forth, and it's right down there. We could take this whole thing apart and take a look, but I've got a quicker way. Now, this device is a snake camera. It's not anything unique, not unique by brand or anything like that. But what it does is it accomplishes the same thing. So you have this, I guess what they would call the snake part, right? And on the front of it is a camera. Around here are some LEDs that will allow it to be illuminated for you to see what you need to see. So all of these work the same way. I think I got this one on Amazon for like $45. Turn it on, right? You turn it on. And once you do, a light will come on and it allows you to see what's going on. So by way of example, I'll point it to the M here. All right, I point it to the M and then you see exactly what's on the screen, right? Now, by that token, what I plan to do is extend the snake down to where I can see where the crank bolt is to see if CBC has been installed, a crank bolt capture solution or so forth. Whether there is or isn't, it could be helpful in some ways. If you see there's a crank bolt capture, then you have some information, right? You have a CBC. If there's not one, it doesn't mean there hasn't been a crank bolt solution in place. It just means that you don't have a CBC. But if you do have a CBC, at least you know you have some protection. It's just a quick way of finding out. So just to give you some context here, I want you to see what you're looking at. Here is a zoomed in shot of the crank bolt. Looking again, I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer this time, and you can see it there. And what you're looking for in the center is the crank bolt. And just to give you guys some further context here, I have a OEM crank hub, which includes the bolts that's used to keep in the crank hub itself. I'll show you now. All right, so here we go. This is the crank hub itself, right? When they're talking about the crank bolt capture, this is the bolt. If your hub were to spin, right, they say one of the ways that your motor could be damaged is because the whole bolt backs out, the crank hub bolt. So what the crank hub capture does is it goes over it. Now the OEM ones, they go into the hub through here and so forth, right? And it goes in. So now when looking at the OEM ones, if you're seeing this completely uncovered, you're seeing these types of bolts, then you don't have a CBC, right? But if you're seeing different types of bolts, black bolts and so forth, then you know you've got a CBC. And the biggest telltale sign is, well, first of all, if they're black or not, because it seems as if all of the aftermarket solutions, they use black bolt. So here's one of the aftermarket solutions. This is one of the more popular ones. It's the Vargas crank bolt capture, or the CBC. Notice that the bolts, as opposed to the OEM ones, are black. In terms of what goes over the crank bolt itself is also black. In between where the smaller crank bolts go, you'll notice it also has an insignia for VVT. This is the best way to know when you do take your snake camera and look down there to figure out what you're looking at. Here is another shot of it. Once again, black covering, has the VVT insignia on it, and it has those black bolts. The head of the bolts are black. Again, this is a different solution. I believe it's for N55, same black bolts. This is a different one, right? Individual racing parts, It's the same common theme running, where you'll see the bolt capture is black. The bolts for this one, also black. Another solution altogether, this one has silver bolts, but you notice the crank bolt capture, or whatever they call their solution, is also black, although it has silver bolts that are different than the OEM ones. So when you do get down there with the snake camera, these are the types of things you want to see. This is how it looks installed. Again, look, as you can see it, you almost have to use the Allen key. And lastly, the Keys Motorsport one, these ones comes in 3 different colors, I believe black, anthracite, and blue. If you're seeing that when you look down there, you know what you're looking at. But look at these, right? Notice how the bolts are. So if you're seeing these aluminum bolts with this bolt head, then you know you've got the OEM one. Now what I found is the best angle to go down is right here, right? So if you look at your brace, this is the passenger side, driver side. On the passenger side, right at almost the middle of the bend, you'll have a spot right here. If you could snake it straight through here, you'll see, you'll be able to see the front of where the crank bolt is, and that's where you'll want to look into. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch to the video here. I'm going to export it out, and I'll talk you through what we're looking at, what you can expect to see, and how you know if you've got one or not. So here we are, looking at the camera. What I did here was I just used my camera to record the camera itself. Going in, I'm going down, and you could see, you know, that black circle there. What you want to do is try to use the camera to get right to the front and inspect it the best that you can. Now it is a tight fit, but as you can see the aluminum colored bolts at the top that look just like the OEM ones, as I've shown you earlier. And you could see it's narrow, but just in terms of the bolt itself, it's clearly uncovered. It doesn't have any CBC or crank bolt capture solution over it. During this video, what I did was I tried to get down there multiple times to get the best possible view, but you know, each time what I saw was that it was the OEM bolts and it was the crank bolt capture. Excuse me, there was no crank bolt capture on my car. I didn't expect to find one, but because I did still buy it used, although from the dealership, I'm not sure this is something they would have inspected, and I just did want to know, because you just never know what's going to be there when you go back to the car. So again, when you look down, if you see anything like this, exposed bolt, these the Crankhub bolts that look like this head design, it's OEM. No matter what that guy says about you know, fix the Crankhub, you know what you'll see.